It outlined a series of initiatives to manage supply and demand this winter. It says it's ready to call into action 5 coal-powered plants, and it's also launching a demand flexibility service in November. That will encourage businesses and consumers to use power outside of the peak periods, including early evenings on weekdays. National Grid hopes this service will free up an extra 2 gigawatts, which is enough to power about 600,000 homes. However, if more chaos in Europe puts pressure on supplies, the UK could be forced to seek gas from different sources. That includes trying to increase imports of liquid natural gas or LNG amid intense global competition. Now, according to National Grid, gas and electricity prices will remain high throughout the winter. Now, for more on this, we're joined by our correspondent in London, Alex Isat. Alex, thanks for joining us. What's been some of the reaction to this pretty extraordinary announcement from National Grid?
Well, to make it clear, and as you already said, this is the worst case scenario. Their winter report, which actually comes out every year, suggests that the last resort is to have these rolling blackouts. They have stated that we will have low supplies, but they should be sufficient to get us through the winter. Of course, though, a lot of the headlines are breaking with the news that we are going to have these rolling blackouts as a fact. But that is not the case, yet it hasn't stopped people being quite scared and worried about what the future may be, what the winter looks like. A lot of people are asking about your hospitals and emergency services, but they do have a protected measure in place, which has been ongoing for many years to make sure that their generators are working and that they are maintained. Everybody is slightly concerned already with the cost of living going up, and people are saying that if the rolling blackouts happen between 4 and 7 p.m. or in the morning, then how is that going to affect working from home? We've been pushing to work from home now since COVID times, and if these rolling blackouts occur, what will that mean for people who aren't going into offices? And also, don't forget, like a couple of years now, past 10 years since Conservatives were government, we have been pushing for an electric world, electric cars, and also electric gas, taking away the gas, using electric heating. And that's obviously going to be using a lot more power. We will need at least 500% more coming into the UK if we go down that path, but that is all future planning. Right now, people are worried about what is going to happen for the winter and how much everything's going to cost.
And Alex, I just wonder, what does this mean politically for UK Prime Minister Liz Truss? She's obviously had a pretty tough first few weeks in office.
Well, she said during her campaign to become the leader that there would not be any rolling blackouts, that we won't have any problems. Now she's not confirming either way, positive or negative. Of course, as we have seen since she has come into power, that she has changed a lot of her policies as it's been ongoing. The interesting fact is people are now asking, what would have Labour done in this situation? Of course, if it had been a situation where Boris hadn't won, then we would be dealing potentially with Jeremy Corbyn. We wouldn't know what that would look like. Of course, many people are using this as a reason to not back the Conservatives. Unfortunately, this situation is one that hasn't just been caused by any political party. However, people will look to Liz Truss to try and get her to do something. Whether or not she can is another question. She has tried to put money across to work on the impact of nuclear. There should be more money put there. She's now released oil fields for fracking and obviously trying to encourage more wind farms. So there is potential again for the longer term that we could see the UK trying to get a lot more of its energy from other places. At the moment, we are really quite reliant on Europe, but we are about to sign the North Sea Energy Co-op deal, which could see a lot more power coming in from our UK continental shelf, which again will be positive, but potentially not soon enough for this winter.
Right, thanks for that. That was Alex Isat, our correspondent here in London. All right, let's move on to the war in Ukraine now. And Kiev says its forces have advanced up to around about 55 kilometres in the Kharkiv region. That's over the last couple of weeks. According to the Ukrainian military, troops have recaptured 93 settlements and more than 2,400 square kilometres in the region since the 21st of September. Ukrainian forces have been advancing in the east and the south of the country in this rapid counter-offensive. Meanwhile, search and rescue teams in the city of Zaporizhia have found 11 bodies and rescued 21 people from the rubble of destroyed buildings. Now, on Thursday, Russian missile attacks destroyed an apartment block in that city. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's remarks suggesting that NATO should launch preventive strikes on Russia, that those have confirmed the need for Russia's so-called special military operation in Ukraine. Take a listen.
The special military operation was started to eliminate these very threats. Attempts by Zelensky's various secretaries to say that he was speaking about something else are risible. We all remember how he declared back in January that Ukraine aspired to have nuclear weapons. It means the idea has long since taken root in him.
Now, according to Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky was referring to imposing sanctions on Russia when he suggested preventive strikes. The war in Ukraine has also ignited fears of a potential nuclear catastrophe here in Europe. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog has described the Zaporizhia nuclear power station as Ukrainian territory. That challenges President Vladimir Putin's claim that the plant is now part of Russia. Take a listen.
The IAEA is not moving. We are going to stay there. We are operating, as we speak, we are operating a rotation. So the current team is going to be replaced with a fresh team. So we are staying there. Of course, this is very recent. All these announcements are just yesterday, and I'm already here discussing about this. So we'll see what the consequences, the practical consequences are.
Now, according to reports, a 4-member team of experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency is due to arrive at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They'll be replacing the previous team of 2 specialists from the agency. A new COVID-19 wave appears to be looming over Europe. And as winter arrives, public health experts are warning about potential vaccine shortages. Experts also say confusion over types of available vaccines will likely limit uptake of booster shots. The Omicron subvariants that dominated this summer are still behind the majority of infections. But according to the World Health Organization, newer Omicron subvariants are also starting to gain ground. The WHO says hundreds of new forms of the Omicron variant are currently being tracked by scientists. Now, according to WHO data, cases in the European Union reached 1.5 million last week. That's an increase of up to 8% from the previous week, despite a pretty dramatic fall in testing. However, globally speaking, case numbers are still continuing to decline. Meanwhile, hospitalisation numbers across many countries in the EU, as well as here in the UK, have also been going up in recent weeks. COVID hospitalisations in the UK have risen by 45%. Omicron-adapted vaccines have been launched in Europe with 2 types of shots. That's addressing the BA1 as well as the BA4-5 subvariants. Meanwhile, here in the UK, only the shots for the BA1 subvariant have been given the green light. European and British officials have endorsed the latest boosters only for select groups of people, including the elderly and those with compromised immune systems. Let's go across to Thailand now, and a day after a shooting at a nursery that killed at least 37 people, families have gathered outside the daycare centre to mourn that extraordinary loss. Mothers can be seen holding onto the toys of their young children as that community in northeastern Thailand grapples with what happened there. The bodies of the victims were taken to a morgue in the city where this attack took place. And flags on government buildings are also flying at half-mast. Later in the day, Thailand's king and the country's prime minister were set to visit survivors of the attack who witnessed the horrors inside that daycare centre. On Thursday, former police officer Panya Hamrab, armed with a pistol and a knife, went on a rampage at that childcare centre. According to the police, the 34-year-old attacker then went home and murdered his wife and own child before taking his own life. The attacker was suspended from the local. The Chinese Communist Party is gearing up for its 20th National Congress. It will start on the 16th of October and will last for a week. Now, these meetings are crucial for setting China's future roadmap. Our next report tells you what to expect from those meetings.
Every 5 years, China's Communist Party members gather in the thousands for a congress that's been taking place since 1921. To the untrained eye, it can seem dull or routine, a sea of officials in dark suits. However, it can say a lot about the party's plans for China. This year, for the 20th installment, it's all about this man, Xi Jinping, who's widely expected to defy convention and secure an unprecedented third term as supreme leader.
This will effectively cement his status as China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong.
Beneath him, Xi will unveil his new leadership team and a sweeping reshuffle of China's elite. We spoke to Reuters' Greater China bureau chief, Tony Monroe, about how the shake-up will affect decisions on everything from the economy to COVID-19, both at home and abroad.
There's a lot of global interest in the Party Congress. It takes place only once every 5 years. The process is opaque and mostly happens behind closed doors.
Specifically, these doors of the Great Hall of the People on Beijing's Tiananmen Square. It's a major political meeting. In mid-October, 2,300 party members from across the country will gather.
And the expectation is, of course, that Xi Jinping will be conferred to a third leadership term. Having said that, we still don't know who will join him on the Politburo Standing Committee, and in particular, who will be tapped to replace the current premier, Li Keqiang.
The Politburo Standing Committee will be the most closely watched unveiling. At the end of the confab, politicians walk across the stage behind Xi. This will be the new engine of the party. Will Xi's role change? Some say unlikely. Xi holds 3 key titles: General Secretary of the Communist Party, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, and President. He's expected to retain all 3.
It would be a surprise if he didn't retain all 3 positions. given that he is perceived to have basically neutralized any meaningful opposition to his leadership during his 10 years in power.
Some pundits have suggested he'll become chairman, like Mao, a title that was abolished in 1982. But there's been no sign he will adopt it. The new leadership will set policy in China for the next 5 years and beyond. For example, over when China may begin to ease its stringent zero-COVID policy.
Broadly speaking, the expectation is for continuity. And that means we can expect to see China continuing to assert itself as a rising economic and geopolitical and military power, and as a global representative or champion of the emerging world, in contrast with the Western or US-led, post-war order. And that manifests itself in continuing to press its claim on Taiwan. And broadly speaking, I think the default expectation is that we would see more of China moving in that direction. China has given very little indication as to how or when it may begin to exit from zero COVID. The challenge for China is that there is, broadly speaking, a lack of herd immunity. So opening the borders and letting COVID in, as it were, could have quite significant consequences for public health. And it is not clear whether China is ready to deal with that or how it plans to manage that. However, there is growing pressure economically for China to ease up or ease back on zero COVID. And it's a policy that, increasingly critics say is just not sustainable for the long term.
Let's stay with China now, and in a boost for the country's economy, its currency became the most traded foreign currency on the Moscow exchange, overtaking the US dollar for the very first time. Tensions with the West over the war in Ukraine have pushed Russia closer to China economically speaking. Now, on Monday, a total of 64,900 yuan to ruble transactions were completed on the Moscow exchange, with the volume of trading reaching over $1 billion, whereas the US dollar and ruble pairing recorded only 29,500 transactions, and spot trading totaled over $1 billion. Strong yuan to ruble trading continued on Tuesday as well, though at a slightly lower level. Russia has been forced to place more of its transactions in yuan, the Chinese currency, after being hit with Western financial sanctions in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. Moscow became the third largest market for offshore yuan transactions in August, accounting for more than 4% of total payments in that currency. Hong Kong and the United Kingdom top that list. However, the yuan still remains far behind the dollar and other major currencies such as the euro when it comes to global payments. Experts say Russia had to de-dollarize its economy due to those Western sanctions. Meanwhile, Russia's Gazprom has announced settlements for its gas supplies to China will be settled half in rubles and half in yuan. Analysts say it was an attempt by both Beijing and Moscow to insulate themselves from Western pressure and from the prominence of the US dollar on international currency markets. Let's move on to other parts of the world now, and trouble is mounting for Sri Lanka's Rajapaksa brothers. A top court in Sri Lanka has granted permission for legal proceedings against the island's former president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, and former Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa. The family, who are one of the most influential on the island, are the subjects of a lawsuit filed by rights group Transparency International that's seeking accountability, really, from the nation's leadership for the worst financial crisis since independence in Sri Lanka. The court there has also granted permission to include two former central bank governors in the investigation. In its order, the Sri Lankan court directed the Auditor General to probe and submit a report by the 30th of November on the Monetary Board's decision to set the value of the Sri Lankan rupee at 203 up against the US dollar. The auditor will also look into the delay in seeking assistance from the International Monetary Fund and the settlement of the sovereign bond using foreign reserves. The court has also directed the central bank's governor in Sri Lanka to produce copies of communications between the bank and the Rajapaksa brothers. The court further directed the Monetary Board to produce copies of reports given to Mahinda and Basil Rajapaksa. Now, if summoned, the trio might have to be present in the court for proceedings. The next hearing in the case is scheduled for the 9th of January next year. However, there is an issue there because the Rajapaksa brothers fled the country after Sri Lanka was hit by an unprecedented economic crisis, with no foreign reserves left to import even basic commodities. That forced people to stand in long queues for fuel and other essentials, really. What followed was mass outrage against the government, and that led to the Rajapaksas being pushed out. Now let's get more of this on this from our correspondent Dasani Altauda.
This unique Supreme Court determination now allows for the courts of Sri Lanka to scrutinize and analyze each and every decision that was made by the 39 respondents, which include several members of the Rajapaksas, namely former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, as well as Finance Ministers Mahinda Rajapaksa and Basil Rajapaksa, along with the governors of the central bank W.D. Lakshman and Ajit Nivad Cabral for the role that they played in mismanaging Sri Lanka's economy into becoming the worst the country has ever faced since independence. This trial will surely be something that the entire nation will be watching with eager interest. So stay with WION as we track the latest proceedings. Reporting from Colombo, I'm Dasani Altauda.
And finally, Prince Harry, singer Elton John and some other big names have launched legal action against the publisher of the Daily Mail newspaper. They're alleging phone tapping and other breaches of privacy. Thanks very much for watching. We'll leave you with this report.
Prince Harry and singer Elton John are among a group that has launched legal action against the publisher of the Daily Mail newspaper. They are alleging phone tapping and other breaches of privacy, a law firm representing the group said on Thursday. The group includes actors Elizabeth Hurley and Sadie Frost, along with Elton John's partner and filmmaker David Furnish, as well as Doreen Lawrence, the mother of black teenager Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered in a racist attack in southeast London in 1993. Law firm Hamlins said in a statement, "The individuals are aware of evidence that points to breaches of privacy, including placing listening devices inside people's cars and commissioning the bugging of live private phone calls." Harry and his wife Meghan's relations with Britain's tabloid press collapsed after their marriage in 2018, and the couple previously said they would have zero engagement with the 4 major British papers, including the Daily Mail, accusing them of false and invasive coverage. Associated Newspapers, the Daily Mail's publisher, refuted the allegations. A spokesman described them as unsubstantiated, highly defamatory, and said it appears to be, quote, a fishing expedition by claimants and their lawyers.
India's global
dating apps. Do we need to tell you about them? In the digital space, such apps have been on the rise. The number of people who use them in search of a companion have increased too. The dating pool has expanded. And as online dating activity increases, so does the probability of some treacherous and life-threatening encounters, unfortunately. So how safe are these digital spaces? Can they ensure a secure and authentic experience? Is online dating